$340 every month, starting immediately. I'm standing in my driveway at 7 in the morning, coffee still hot, staring at a notice of non-compliance from the Maple Ridge Homeowners Association, papers wet from the night's rain, and at the bottom, a handwritten note from Cornelia Voss, HOA president, that reads, "Mr. Briggs, this community has standards. I suggest you start meeting them." Standards. I own 4 trucks, parked legally on my own property, and this woman is charging me $340 a month for it. No hearing, no warning, just a fine and a lecture from someone who'd never once introduced herself in 6 years. I folded the letter, took a sip of coffee. Here's what Cornelia didn't check before coming after me. I don't just own this house. I own 9 of the 11 houses on her street. 9. What would you do? Drop it below. I read every one. Where are you watching from? This story gets very good, very fast. Let me back up. My name is Harlan Briggs. I grew up in Waukesha, Wisconsin, youngest of 5, in a house where the gutters were always clean and the driveway was always swept, because my father believed that how you kept your property said everything about who you were. I carried that with me everywhere I went. 22 years I spent as a diesel mechanic for Midwest Consolidated Transport. Started on the shop floor, worked my way up to foreman. Calloused hands, coffee always too hot, and the smell of 10W40 so permanent on my skin that my wife Delia said she could find me in a crowd blindfolded. I didn't mind. Honest work smells like something. I retired at 58, no debt, a pension, and a very specific plan for the rest of my life. I was going to buy houses, quietly, patiently, one at a time. I started with the foreclosure next door to my place on Clement Drive, a mid-century neighborhood in Marshfield, Ohio, that had seen better decades but had good bones. I gutted the bathroom, refinished the floors myself on weekends, and rented it to a school teacher named Vera, who paid every month like clockwork. Then I bought the house across the street, then the corner property, then the pale blue split level that had sat empty for 2 years because the roof leaked and nobody wanted to touch it. I touched it. I fixed the roof. By 62, I owned 9 of the 11 houses on Clement Drive. The other 2 belonged to Otis, retired postal worker, magnificent frog collection on his porch, zero tolerance for nonsense, and a young couple named the Garfields, who'd moved in 3 years prior with 2 kids and a portable basketball hoop. I never broadcast any of this. I just showed up, fixed things, kept the grass cut, same as always. Then Cornelia Voss moved in. She came from a gated community in Scottsdale, Arizona, and she made sure you knew it. Drove a pearl white Lexus SUV that lived behind a permanently closed garage door, sealed away like the neighborhood air wasn't quite good enough for it. She had the kind of smile that arrived before she did, and left about a second after the conversation stopped being useful to her. Within 8 months, she'd run for HOA president unopposed, because nobody else wanted the job, and she'd gotten to work immediately. New rules appeared every quarter like bad weather. No recreational vehicles visible from the street. No portable basketball hoops after 8 p.m. No garden gnomes above 12 inches in height. That last one seemed engineered specifically for Otis's ceramic frogs. I watched him read that notice on his porch, lips moving, expression traveling slowly from confusion to something I can only describe as deeply personal offense. Then came the vehicle rule. No more than 2 vehicles per household visible from the street at any given time. Violation. $340 per month added to your assessment. I had 4 vehicles across 3 of my properties. 2 work trucks I used for hauling materials, a flatbed trailer, and my personal pickup. All parked legally. All on property I owned outright. Deed in hand, taxes paid, not a lien in sight. Cornelia had looked at my driveways and seen a problem. She had not looked at the property records. That was her first mistake. The handwritten note at the bottom of the notice said, "Mr. Briggs, this community has standards. I suggest you start meeting them." I read it twice, folded it, put it in my breast pocket next to the deed summaries I'd been carrying since tax season. Then I went inside and called my accountant. The HOA held its monthly meetings in the community room of the local library. Beige carpet, folding chairs, a projector screen with a crack running down the left side that nobody had ever fixed. The place smelled like old laminate and somebody's reheated soup. 20 people max, most of them half asleep, voting on fence colors and wreath budgets. I showed up 5 minutes early and sat in the back row. No binder, no notes. Just me in a Carhartt jacket and work boots, looking for all the world like a man who'd wandered in from a job site. Cornelia called the meeting to order and moved briskly through the agenda. Fence paint approvals, holiday wreath budget, then Otis's frogs. She referred to them as a persistent aesthetic liability. Otis, sitting 3 chairs from me, muttered something I won't repeat here, but I agreed with every word of it. Then she hit item 6, vehicle limitation enforcement. A slide appeared on the cracked projector screen. It was a photograph of my properties on Clement Drive, taken from the street without my knowledge, with red circles drawn around every visible vehicle. She had counted. She announced the $340 monthly surcharge would apply immediately, and here's where it got creative. Retroactively for the previous 60 days. Retroactively. 60 days. She wanted money for violations she'd decided existed before she'd written the rule down. I raised my hand. Mrs. Voss, can I see the section of the covenant that allows retroactive enforcement? Her smile was patient, the kind of patient that means sit down and stop making this difficult. Section 7, paragraph 4, she said. Could you read it aloud, please? She did. It said, enforcement of newly adopted rules shall begin upon written notification to the property owner. Nothing about retroactive application, not one word. So the 60 days of back fees, I said, wouldn't actually be permitted under your own covenants? The room went quiet. Someone coughed. Cornelia's smile tightened by exactly 1 millimeter. She said the board would revisit the language and moved on. The retroactive fees disappeared that night and never came back. Small win, bloodless, surgical. But Cornelia noticed, and Cornelia did not like to be corrected in public. 2 weeks later, a second notice arrived. This one demanded I register all vehicles associated with my household with the HOA within 30 days, proof of insurance, proof of registration, the works. Failure to comply would result in the vehicles being reported to the city as abandoned property. Abandoned property, on land I owned, land I paid taxes on, land I'd personally re-roofed, re-plumbed, and re-floored with my own hands. I stood in my driveway reading that letter in the late October chill, the sharp smell of diesel drifting off my bigger work truck, still warm from the morning run to the hardware depot, and underneath that, the faint sweetness of someone burning leaves 3 streets over. I gave myself exactly 60 seconds of quiet fury. Then I went inside and called Stu. Stu was my accountant. Bow ties, zero small talk. Genuine enthusiasm for tax code that I had long since stopped trying to understand. I told him what was happening. He pulled up the property records for Clement Drive while I was still on the phone. Harlan, he said after a minute, you know you own 9 of these 11 parcels, right? I know, Stu. And she's trying to fine you for parking on them. That's correct. A long pause. Okay, he said slowly, the way a man says okay, when what he means is, this is going to be interesting. Let me pull the HOA's financial disclosures. I told him to pull everything. Here's something most people don't know. In Ohio, HOA members have a statutory right under the Planned Community Law, Ohio Revised Code Section 5312, to request and review the association's full financial records, annual budget, reserve fund, every assessment collected, every dollar spent. You don't need a lawyer to ask. You just need to ask in writing. I sent the request certified mail the next morning. Return receipt. Green card and everything. HOA rules are binding contracts, but only if they're applied consistently with the covenant's own language. Any enforcement action that contradicts the covenant's written terms is challengeable in writing, without an attorney, at the very next meeting. While I waited for the financial records, I did my own homework. I spent 3 evenings at my kitchen table, coffee going cold, Delia watching the news in the other room, going through Ohio Revised Code Section 5312, the Planned Community Law, line by line. I'm not a lawyer, never claimed to be, but I spent 22 years reading maintenance manuals and equipment contracts, and I have a particular gift for finding the one sentence in a 60-page document that changes everything. What I found was this. An HOA can restrict the number of vehicles parked on common property. It cannot unreasonably restrict a property owner's use of their own private driveway. My trucks were on my driveways, my properties, not the street, not the common areas, mine. Deeded, recorded, tax assessed, mine. The vehicle rule, as written and applied to my situation, had a serious legal problem. I wrote that up in a 2-page document, attached copies of the relevant statutes, and mailed it to the HOA board, certified, return receipt, along with the vehicle registrations and insurance documents they'd demanded. Polite, complete, documented. Cornelia received it on a Thursday. By Saturday, flyers had appeared in mailboxes up and down Clement Drive. They weren't from the HOA officially. They were from something calling itself the Maple Ridge Quality of Life Coalition, which, as I confirmed with about 45 seconds of searching the Ohio Secretary of State's business registry, did not exist as a registered entity of any kind. It was Cornelia and 2 board members with a color printer, and apparently a lot of free time. The flyer was titled, "Concerns About Our Neighborhood." It featured a photograph of my properties, taken from the street without my permission, and a list of concerns: excessive vehicle traffic, commercial activity in a residential zone, and, my personal favorite, unclear ownership structure creating community uncertainty. Community uncertainty. I read that 3 times. I almost laughed. Otis appeared at my door that evening with a copy of the flyer and a pot of chili. He set the chili on my kitchen counter and looked at me the way a man looks at you when he's already decided whose side he's on. "You know what she's doing, right?" he said. "I know exactly what she's doing. So what are you going to do about it?" "Right now?" I pulled 2 bowls from the cabinet. "I'm going to eat your chili." He sat down. "And after that?" "After that, I'm going to wait for Stu to call me back." Stu called the next morning. The HOA's financial disclosure was everything I'd asked for and more than I'd expected. The Maple Ridge HOA collected monthly assessments from 11 households on Clement Drive. Total annual operating budget, $47,200. Of those 11 households, 9 were owned by me, directly or through Briggs Property Holdings LLC, the limited liability company I'd incorporated 8 years ago on Stu's advice. Stu had done the math before I even asked. "Harlan," he said, and I could hear him tapping his pen on his desk, which he only did when the numbers were doing something genuinely surprising. "Between your 9 properties, you're paying $38,880 a year into this HOA. What's that as a percentage?" 82%. I set the phone down on the kitchen table, not hanging up, just setting it down. I walked to the window and looked out at Clement Drive, my work truck in the driveway, Otis's frog standing sentinel on his porch in the November gray, the Garfield kids' bikes leaning against the fence. I picked the phone back up. "Stu, she's been spending my money to harass me." "That is," he said carefully, "one accurate way to describe the situation. 82%. I was funding the organization that was trying to find me, publishing flyers about me, and filing complaints against me, and Cornelia had done all of it without ever once checking who was actually writing the checks." The gravel crunched under my boots as I walked out to the truck. Sharp and satisfying in the cold air, that sound. I drove to Stu's office to pick up the printed disclosures, thinking about leverage the whole way. What it was, how you used it, and, most importantly, when you waited. I wasn't ready to move yet. I needed Cornelia to make one more mistake first. In most states, HOA members have a statutory right to request and review the association's financial records. If you're a major dues payer, knowing the exact budget breakdown is your first real power move, and it costs nothing but a certified letter. January arrived the way it always does in Richland County, without apology. 11 degrees, gray sky, the streets of Clement Drive coated in that fine, gritty slush that forms when road salt meets old snow and loses all ambition. I pulled my 2 work trucks into the driveways that morning, parking them exactly where I always did, 6 feet from the property boundary, inside the white lines I'd painted myself years ago. At 8:15 a.m., someone knocked on my door. Young man, city clipboard, apologetic expression. His name was Terrence, and he was a code enforcement officer 8 months into the job, and someone had filed a complaint alleging I was operating a commercial vehicle storage business from a residential property. I invited him in for coffee. We sat at my kitchen table for 45 minutes. I showed Terrence my deeds, all 9 of them, organized in labeled folders, the way my father taught me to keep paperwork. I showed him the vehicle registrations. I showed him the Ohio zoning code definition of commercial vehicle storage, which requires a minimum of 5 unregistered or inoperable vehicles, none of which applied here. Every truck I owned was registered. Everyone was insured. Everyone ran. Terrence looked at the paperwork for a long time. Then he looked up. "Sir, these are 9 separate properties? 9 of 11 on this street." He wrote, "No violation found" on his clipboard, thanked me for the coffee, and stood to leave. Then, almost as an afterthought, the kind of afterthought that changes everything, he stopped at the door. "The complaint was filed anonymously," he said, "but it came through the HOA's complaint portal." I nodded. "I know." He left. I refilled my coffee and stood at the kitchen window watching his city truck pull away, the exhaust hanging white in the cold air. Cornelia had just filed a false complaint with a city agency against me on my own property, using the HOA's official systems. She was no longer just annoying. She was leaving a paper trail. I called Constance Mabry that same afternoon. Constance was my attorney, property and HOA law, 30 years of it, silver hair cut short, the kind of quiet precision that made opposing counsel visibly uncomfortable before she'd said a single word. I laid out everything, the fine notices, the flyers, the fake coalition, the false complaint, the financial disclosures, all of it. She listened without interrupting. When I finished, she was quiet for a moment. "You know what you have here," she said. It wasn't a question. "I have an idea. You have majority ownership of an HOA that has been operating against its own founding documents and against the interests of its primary funder." A pause. "And I think it's time we looked very carefully at those founding documents." She pulled the original 1987 HOA declaration from the Richland County Recorder's office that week. I didn't know what she was looking for. She did. While Constance read, I made my move. Under Ohio Revised Code 5312.10, any HOA member owning at least 25% of the assessed units in a planned community can compel a special membership meeting by submitting a written petition. I owned 9 of 11 units, 81%. I could call a meeting whenever I chose. I'd known this for 2 months and had been saving it. I submitted the petition on a Wednesday, certified mail to each board member, and a hand-delivered copy to Cornelia's front door, which I watched her accept through her living room window. The expression on her face, from across the street, looked like someone who'd just bitten into something and wasn't sure yet exactly how bad it was going to get. 3 agenda items. 1. A review of the vehicle limitation rule and its legal compliance with Ohio law. 2. A full financial audit of HOA expenditures for the prior 3 years. 3. A vote on proposed amendments to the covenant. I gave 20 days notice. The statute required 14. I wanted every single person on Clement Drive in that room. That evening I could see lights on at the vice president's house until 10 p.m. Cornelia's Lexus in the driveway. An emergency board huddle, no doubt. She was scrambling. I could feel it the way you feel a storm coming before the temperature actually drops. Something in the air, some shift in pressure. In most states, HOA members holding enough units above a statutory threshold, often 25%, can compel a special membership meeting to vote on bylaw amendments or even board removal. Own enough of the community and you own the agenda. 3 days before the meeting, Constance called me. I was in the garage bleeding the radiator, the one I'd been meaning to fix for 3 weeks, when my phone rang. I wiped my hands on a shop rag and picked up. Constance didn't do small talk, so when she paused before speaking, I put down the rag entirely. "Harlan, I found something in the 1987 declaration, something nobody has looked at in 37 years. Go ahead." The Maple Ridge HOA was incorporated as a mandatory membership association. You know that part. But the original governance clause, the one from the founding document, was never amended. And it says that voting power in the association is proportional to the number of units owned. Another pause. 1 unit, 1 vote. Not 1 household, 1 unit. I was very still. Say that again. Every HOA vote, bylaw amendments, board elections, rule changes. Your 9 units give you 9 votes. Cornelia has been running this association as though every household gets one vote regardless of how many units they own. But that's not what the founding document says. It has never been what the founding document says. Her voice was steady and precise, the way it always was when she was about to land something heavy. Every rule change she's pushed through in the last 4 years, the vehicle limitation, the NOM ordinance, all of it, was passed without the votes required by the actual governing document. Constitutionally speaking, Harlan, Cornelia Voss has been running an HOA that doesn't legally exist in its current form. I set the phone down on my workbench. Didn't hang up, just set it down. I walked to the garage door and looked out at Clement Drive, my work truck in the driveway, Otis's house with the ceramic frogs lined up on the porch like a small frozen battalion, the Garfield kids' bikes locked up for winter, leaning against the fence at the exact angle an 8-year-old leaves a bike when he's in a hurry to get inside. Normal. Quiet. Mine. I picked the phone back up. Constance, the fines they've collected over the last 4 years, were they legally valid? Almost certainly not. Can I get them back? A smile came through the phone. I could hear it. That, she said, is exactly what I'd like to find out. She called me again the next morning with numbers. Over 4 years, Cornelia's board had levied, collected, or attempted to collect fines, totaling approximately $18,400 from residents of Clement Drive. Some of my tenants had actually paid. Out of fear or confusion, the money quietly deducted from savings they couldn't spare. Otis had paid $760 over the frog ordinance. The Garfields had paid $480 over a landscaping dispute involving a strip of mulch that Cornelia had decided was aesthetically incompatible with the block. The vehicle surcharge against me alone, had I paid it, would have been $4,080 over 12 months. I hadn't paid a dollar of it. I'd disputed every notice in writing. But the attempt had been made, officially and repeatedly. $18,400, extracted from a retired postal worker, a young family, a school teacher, and a handful of working tenants by a woman who had convinced herself that running a neighborhood HOA gave her the authority of a county judge. I sat with that number for 48 hours. Then I pulled out my legal pad and started writing a list. Not a list of grievances, a list of exactly what I was going to do, in exactly what order, starting right now. I've been fixing things my whole life. Engines, roofs, busted plumbing at 10 p.m. on a Sunday in the snow. And the thing about fixing something right, really right, not just good enough, is that you don't rush it. You lay out every tool before you start. You know where every bolt goes before you pull the first one. The 10 days before the meeting, I treated like a job. First, Otis. I walked across the street on a Saturday morning with 2 cups of coffee and the full truth. I laid out everything. The ownership structure, the governance clause, the legally invalid rule changes, the recoverable fines. Otis listened without interrupting, which for Otis is a significant personal achievement. When I finished, he looked at his ceramic frogs on the porch for a long moment. "She fined me for those," he said. "I know. Those frogs belong to my mother." "I know, Otis." He looked back at me. "What do you need me to do?" "Just show up." He showed up. Next, the Garfields. Priya ran a small bookkeeping practice from home. Her husband Dale drove for a regional delivery service. 2 kids, tight budget, good people. They'd been fined twice in 3 years. Once over their son's basketball hoop, once over that strip of mulch. When I explained what I'd found, Priya didn't ask questions. She said 3 words. "What do you need?" She was an accountant. She helped Constance organize the financial exhibits into a format that would be impossible to dispute or ignore. Then I called my tenants, all 8 households, one by one. I didn't ask them to show up as allies. I asked them whether they'd been fined or pressured, and whether they'd be willing to put it in writing. 6 of 8 said yes. The paper trail thickened. Constance prepared a 22-page legal memorandum for the meeting. The governance clause, the vote proportionality issue, an itemized record of every disputed fine and its legal basis, a proposed amended declaration that brought the HOA into full compliance with both its own 1987 founding document and Ohio state law. She didn't frame it as an attack, she framed it as a mirror. Here is what you are. Here is what the law requires. Here is the distance between the two. She also prepared a formal demand letter for the recovery of all improperly levied fines. citing the constitutional invalidity of the board votes that had authorized them. Addressed to the HOA as an entity, professional, precise, devastating in the way that only very quiet documents can be. I reached out to Lonnie Vance at the Marshfield Gazette, a reporter who'd written, 3 years prior, a well-read piece on HOA overreach in a neighboring county. I didn't give him a story. I gave him a heads up. There was going to be a public meeting, and it might be worth his time. Lonnie said he'd think about it. He showed up. Ohio is a one-party consent state for audio recording. That means I can legally record any conversation I'm a participant in, including a meeting I've been formally invited to, held in a public building. I bought a small digital recorder, the kind that sits flat on a table and looks like a USB drive from 6 feet away. I tested it in my kitchen the night before. Clear audio, every word. I also arranged for Constance to bring a court reporter. Not because the meeting required one, because the presence of a court reporter changes how people speak. Every word transcribed, in real time, by a professional. People tend to think more carefully before they say something they can't take back. That wasn't a trick. That was a fact about human nature. And I had no interest in tricks. I had interest in documentation. The morning of the meeting, I was up at 5:45. Dark outside, radiator ticking in the kitchen, the smell of dark roast filling the house the way it always does before anything important. I ironed my shirt. I drove to Constance's office, loaded the printed copies of the memorandum into a cardboard box, and set it in the bed of my truck. I had 11 copies, one for every house on Clement Drive. The sky was pale gray blue, that particular February color that hasn't decided yet whether winter is finished. The gravel in Constance's parking lot crunched sharp and clean under my boots as I walked back to the truck. I was ready. I had been ready for weeks. I just needed the meeting to catch up to me. The weekend before the meeting, Cornelia made 3 moves. All 3 were mistakes. The first, she called an emergency session of the HOA board, just the 3 members, no general membership present, and pushed through a pair of hasty amendments. First, all special meetings would henceforth require a 2/3 supermajority to pass any bylaw change, rather than a simple majority. Second, only one designated representative per property could vote at any membership meeting, regardless of how many units that owner held. The intent was transparent. If my 9 votes could be collapsed into 1, she'd have the board's 3 votes plus potentially the Garfields, for 4 against 2. A real fight instead of a rout. She thought she was clever. What she didn't know, because she still hadn't read the 1987 Declaration carefully enough, was that under Ohio Revised Code 5312.09, amendments to HOA governing documents require a vote of the full membership. A board cannot amend a declaration by resolution alone. The emergency session was procedurally void before the ink dried. Constance had anticipated this move so precisely that she'd already written the 2-page memo addressing it before it happened. She'd been doing this for 30 years. Cornelia had been doing it for 4. The second move, the Facebook post. On Saturday morning, a post appeared on the neighborhood's Facebook group from an account with a generic name, no profile photo, and the very specific vocabulary of someone who had spent a formative amount of time in Arizona HOA meetings. It alleged I was a slum landlord, using the HOA as a personal profit vehicle, and that my tenants lived in substandard conditions. Substandard conditions. I want to be precise about what I felt reading that, because it wasn't rage. Rage burns fast and makes you stupid. It was something colder, something that clarified. I had driven to a hardware store at 10 p.m. on Christmas Eve because Vera's furnace had quit. I had replaced the plumbing in 4 of my properties with my own hands. I had never once, not once, left a maintenance call unreturned for longer than an hour during daylight. My tenants saw the post before I did. Vera wrote, "I have lived here for 6 years. My landlord fixed my roof during a rainstorm. Whoever posted this is lying." The family on the corner wrote, "Our heat has never been out. He replaced our back door when it warped last summer. Please stop." The post was deleted by Sunday morning, but screenshots exist. They always do. Priya Garfield had saved every one. The third move was the most legally interesting, which is a polite way of saying it was the most desperate. With 4 days left before the meeting, Cornelia's attorney, a man named Philip Garrett, sent a letter to Constance, arguing that my petition contained a technical deficiency, and that the meeting should be postponed pending review. The alleged deficiency: my petition had been submitted on paper rather than through the HOA's official digital portal. The HOA's official digital portal was a Google form. It had existed for 6 months. Ohio HOA law says nothing, absolutely nothing, about digital submission requirements. The statute requires only that a petition be submitted in writing to the board, which I had done by certified mail with signature confirmation from each board member. Constance's reply to Garrett was 7 sentences long. The last one was, "We will see you Thursday." The meeting was not postponed. I found out about Cornelia's door-to-door campaign from Wanda. Wanda was one of my tenants, retired teacher's aide, ground floor unit in the house on the east end of the block, kept her porch light on every night because she believed in it. She texted me Sunday evening, "That HOA woman came by, told me you were trying to take over the neighborhood and I should vote against you, just so you know." I texted back, "What did you say?" A minute passed. I told her you fixed my water heater on a Sunday, in the snow. Then I closed the door. I set my phone on the kitchen table and looked at it for a moment. Outside, Clement Drive was dark and cold and quiet, the kind of quiet that only comes in February, when everybody is inside and the street belongs to nobody. My street, my houses, my neighbors, tenants, friends, a retired man with his mother's frogs. I picked up my phone and typed, "Thank you, Wanda. See you Thursday." The night before the meeting, I sat at my kitchen table, with everything spread out in front of me. 9 property deeds. The 1987 Founding Declaration, photocopied and tabbed. Constance's 22-page memorandum. The financial disclosures. The fine records. Terrence's written statement, provided voluntarily after I'd explained the full picture. The Facebook screenshots, organized chronologically by Priya. Garrett's letters and Constance's replies. And my legal pad, yellow, college-ruled, same kind I'd used for 30 years of repair logs and parts orders, with 11 numbered items in my handwriting. Delia had come home from Columbus 2 days earlier. She'd followed the whole thing by phone and arrived knowing more about Ohio HOA law than most people learn in a lifetime. She sat across from me now, hands wrapped around a mug, looking at the spread of paper on the table. "You could have told her years ago," she said, "that you owned all these houses." "I know. Would have saved a lot of trouble." "Probably." She was quiet for a moment. "So why didn't you?" I thought about that. Because I wanted to fix things the right way, not the fast way. She looked at me over her mug. "And is this the right way?" "I think tomorrow's the right way," I said. "Tonight's just the last night before it." She went to bed at 10. I stayed up until midnight, going through the legal pad one more time. Not because I was worried. I wasn't. I was what Delia would later describe to our daughter as that kind of calm that only comes after a man has thought something all the way through and run out of things to worry about. The morning of the meeting, I was up at 5:45. Dark outside, radiator ticking. The air smelled of dark roast coffee, and faintly, the metallic tang of old iron heat, the same smell that had filled every garage and kitchen I'd ever worked in. I dressed deliberately. Work pants, clean flannel, the good boots. Not a suit, not a performance, just myself. I loaded the cardboard box into the truck. 11 copies of the memorandum, rubber-banded in pairs, with a cover letter I'd written myself. 1 paragraph, plain English, explaining what the document contained and why it mattered to every person in that room. I drove down Clement Drive on the way out, slow, past my 9 houses. Every one of them with something I'd fixed, some repair that had cost me a Saturday or a Tuesday evening or a Christmas Eve. The pale blue split level with the new roof. Vera's place with the bathroom I'd gutted by hand. The corner house where the family had written that Facebook comment without me asking them to. Past Otis's porch. The frogs were frozen still in the February dark, patient as ever, standing guard over a house that belonged to a man who had never once in his life done anything to deserve a fine. I turned onto the main road and let the truck get up to speed. The heater was working. I'd fixed it myself, October, and the cab was warm by the time I pulled into Constance's parking lot to pick up the additional exhibits. At 6:30 p.m., I knocked on Otis's door. He came out in his good coat, brown wool, the kind of coat a man owns for decades, and we drove to the library without talking much. There wasn't much left to say. We'd set it over coffee and chili and certified mail and 20 days of quiet preparation. The library parking lot crunched under the truck's tires as I pulled in. Through the glass doors I could see the community room already lit up, fluorescent, flat, the same beige carpet and folding chairs as always. The court reporter was setting up at a side table, her machine open, fingers testing the keys. Lonnie Vance from the Gazette sat in the back row with a notebook, and the focused stillness of a man who has learned to recognize when something is actually worth writing down. And at the front table, Cornelia Voss, binder open, reading glasses on her head, the pearl-white Lexus in the parking lot outside, engine already cold. She saw me come in. She watched me set the cardboard box on the table. She watched me pull out 11 copies of the memorandum and place one at every chair. She picked hers up, started reading. I sat down, folded my hands, and waited. The meeting was called to order at 7:03 p.m. 14 people in that beige carpeted room. Cornelia and her 2 board members at the front table. Me and Otis, the Garfields, 5 of my tenants, Vera, Wanda, and 3 others who'd driven over in the February cold because they wanted to be there when it happened. Constance at my right, the court reporter, keys ready. Lonnie Vance in the back, notebook open. Cornelia surveyed the room. Her eyes stopped on the court reporter, then on Lonnie, then on Constance, whom she recognized from 3 months of correspondence. The smile was in place, but it was working harder than usual. She called the meeting to order and immediately moved to address what she called Item 0, the board's determination that certain agenda items were procedurally out of order, given the emergency amendments passed the previous weekend. She read from the amendment language. She sounded very certain. She always sounded very certain. Constance let her finish. Then Constance stood up. 5'4", silver hair, the patient expression of someone who has done this for 30 years and simply does not have time for theater. She pulled out the memorandum, already sitting at every seat in the room, opened it to page 3, and read aloud the relevant section of Ohio Revised Code 5312.09. Clear, unambiguous. Governing document amendments require a vote of the full membership. A board cannot amend a declaration by resolution alone. The amendments passed by the board last weekend, Constance said, setting the statute printout flat on the table, were not within the board's authority to pass. They are void. The meeting will proceed under the governing documents as they existed before last weekend. Philip Garrett cleared his throat from the back of the room and started to speak. Constance looked at him with the specific flatness of a woman who has seen this exact move performed by much better attorneys than Philip Garrett. Mr. Garrett, you are not a member of this association. You are here as an observer. Unless you'd like to be asked to leave, I'd suggest you sit down. Garrett sat down. The first vote, a motion to present the 1987 Governance Clause and confirm voting rights under its terms. Constance had brought a portable projector. She set it up in 30 seconds, aimed it at the white wall at the end of the room, and put the founding declaration on it. Scanned, enlarged, the relevant paragraph highlighted yellow. The words were visible from every seat in the room. Voting power shall be apportioned at 1 vote per unit owned. 1 unit, 1 vote. Not 1 household, 1 unit. The board called for a roll call vote on the motion. Constance called each property by address. 9 of mine, yes. Otis, yes. The Garfields, yes. The 3 board members, no. 11-3. Motion passed. The room was quiet in the way that rooms get quiet when something irrevocable has just happened. I watched Cornelia doing math she had never done before. I watched her arrive at the answer. I watched her understand what it meant. I stood up. I didn't use notes. I'd been carrying these words in my chest for 4 months, and they knew the way out. Mrs. Voss, I'd like to put something on the record. I kept my voice level. This wasn't a moment for raised voices. You've been fining me, harassing my tenants, filing a complaint with the city that a code enforcement officer determined was without basis, and funding a smear campaign about my character, all of it using HOA dues, 82% of which come from me, from my 9 properties on this street. I paused. I have owned 9 of these 11 houses for years. You have been running this HOA with my money, against my interests, in violation of your own founding documents. That ends tonight. Lonnie Vance was writing so fast, his pen made an audible scratch in the silence. Constance presented the second motion. Remove the current board and replace it with a 3-person interim board. Me, Otis, and Priya Garfield. Roll call vote. 11-3. Motion passed. Cornelia sat at the front table for a long moment. Binder still open, reading glasses still on her head, the room completely still around her. Then she picked up her bag. She stood. She walked out of the library without a single word, the door swinging shut behind her with a soft, final click. In the parking lot, I heard the Lexus start. The court reporter's keys kept going for another few seconds. Then Otis said, quietly, "Well, that happened." And the room exhaled. The aftermath took about 6 months to fully settle, which, in my experience, is about how long any major repair takes before it stops finding new things to surprise you. Constance filed the formal demand for recovery of the improperly levied fines the week after the meeting. Cornelia contested it through Garrett for about 3 weeks, until Garrett apparently reviewed the complete record and advised her to stop. The HOA, under its new interim board, reached a settlement. $18,400 returned. Otis got his $760 back. The Garfields got their $480. My tenants got theirs. The refunds came from the HOA's reserve fund, which Cornelia had never touched. One of the few genuinely responsible things she'd done in 4 years. She didn't face criminal charges. The complaint filings, the anonymous post, the fake coalition, all harmful, but the bar for criminal liability is high. And I didn't pursue it. Lonnie Vance asked me about that when he interviewed me for the Gazette piece that ran 2 weeks after the meeting. I told him, "She's done. That's enough." This was never about punishment. It was about stopping it. His piece ran under the headline, "Local landlord owned 82% of his own HO, and it took 4 years for anyone to check." Most read article in the Gazette's online edition that month. By a long distance. The new interim board held its first official meeting 6 weeks after the library. We adopted a revised declaration, drafted by Constance, reviewed by every household on the block, that brought the HOA into full compliance with Ohio law. Transparent financial reporting, online and available to all members. A formal dispute resolution process before any fine could be issued. And the vehicle limitation rule, gone. The Nome ordinance, also gone. Otis received this news with quiet satisfaction. He went out the following weekend and bought 2 more ceramic frogs. He placed them on the top porch step, facing the street, and did not say anything about it to anyone. He didn't have to. The Gazette piece brought some attention I hadn't expected. A few interview requests, some calls from people in other states with their own HOA stories. Different details, same shape, same feeling of petty authority grinding against people who just wanted to live in their own homes in peace. I thought about what to do with that attention for a while. Then I called the Marshfield Community Foundation. We set up the Clement Drive Neighborhood Scholarship, $2,500 a year, for a graduating senior from any Marshfield public high school demonstrating financial need and planning to pursue a vocational, trades, or community college education. Not 4-year only, not prestige only, for the kind of kid who might become a mechanic or a plumber or a diesel technician who works his way up to shop foreman and then one day, quietly, starts buying houses. The first award was presented in May. I went to the ceremony. I sat in the back. I did not make a speech. The night Delia came home from Columbus, she walked into the kitchen, set her bag down, looked at me standing there with my coffee in a house that hadn't changed, legal pads on the counter, tool belt on the hook, ceramic frogs visible from the window across the street, and she said, "Was it worth the wait?" I looked out at Clement Drive, my 9 houses, Otis's porch, the Garfield kids' bikes back out now that the weather had turned, leaning against the fence at that same hurried angle. "Yeah," I said, "it was."
You know what stays with me about Hardin's story? It's not a meeting, it's not a vote, or Cornelia working out, or any of that. It's the fact that he sat on it for months, while the letters kept coming, while they filed a complaint with the city, while the flyers went out. He just kept his paperwork organized and waited. Most of us, we get a $240 fine on property we owned. We're on the phone the same afternoon, angry, reactive. And the second you're reactive, you have already given something away. Harlan didn't do that. He read the covenant, he pulled the financial records, he found a governance clause from 1967 that nobody had ever looked at in 37 years. And when he finally walked into the library, he didn't need to raise his voice once. I think about how many people out there are somewhere in the middle of something like this right now. Maybe not 9 houses on the same street, but the same feeling, the same letter, same person at the front of the room acting like they wrote the law instead of just inherited a binder. If that's you, I'm curious what you're dealing with. Drop it in the comments. Doesn't have to be resolved, doesn't have to have a clean ending yet. And if this channel is new to you, stick around. This is one story. We've got more, and some of them are, let's just say Harlan had it relatively straightforward compared to what's coming. Hit subscribe if you want to be there for those. We'll see you next time.